Hey everyone, welcome. I'm so glad you're here tonight for this special Thanksgiving service. Honestly, there's something really heartwarming about hearing people share what God has done in their lives right tonight. We've got stories of faith, perseverance, and pure gratitude, real-life moments that will probably make you laugh, maybe tear up a bit, and definitely leave you feeling encouraged. So, grab a seat, get comfy, and let's celebrate together the amazing ways God shows up in our lives. So, before we dive into all the incredible stories tonight, I want to take a minute to talk about Thanksgiving. You know, I usually like to start by pulling up the President's Thanksgiving Proclamation each year. It's kind of become a little tradition for me, but this year, well, I couldn't find it. I looked everywhere online, and all I could see were other statements, and I thought, okay, maybe I'm missing something here. Maybe it hasn't been issued yet, or maybe I just wasn't looking in the right spot, but I thought, you know what? Let's not get stuck on that. Instead, I found Governor Younan's proclamation, and honestly, it was perfect for what we're doing here tonight. Reading through it, I was reminded just how long Thanksgiving has been a part of our national story. Since George Washington first proclaimed it as a national holiday in 1789, people have been encouraged to pause, reflect, and give thanks for the blessings in their lives. And it's not just a historical note, it's a reminder that gratitude has always been at the heart of our community, our families, our country. Governor Younan's words highlighted so many things I think we can all connect with tonight: the strength of our families, the richness of our communities, the schools, places of worship, the diversity around us, the civil and constitutional rights we often take for granted, and even the sacrifices of those who serve in public safety and the military. It's a long list, but the point is clear. Thankfulness isn't just for the easy days, it's for everything, even when life gets messy. I love that the proclamation mentions Thanksgiving as a day for reflection, a time to embrace the people around us and make memories, to keep traditions alive, and to recognize the gifts we've been given and in our lives. I think that's so important. Sometimes we get caught up in everything else, all the running around, the stress, the uncertainty, and we forget to just pause and say, wow, look at all the ways I've been blessed. That's really what tonight is, about celebrating those blessings, seeing God at work in the everyday, and hearing directly from people who have lived through some remarkable journeys. And so, with that in mind, I wanted to anchor us in Scripture. I turned to Psalm 107 verses 1 through 9, which really felt like the right place to start this evening. It's a psalm that calls us to give thanks to the Lord for His enduring goodness and mercy. The way it talks about people wandering in the wilderness, facing hardship, being hungry and thirsty, fainting in their souls, and then crying out to the Lord, it's so relatable, isn't it? We all have seasons where life feels like that, where it's hard to see a way forward. And then the psalm reminds us that when we call out, God delivers us, guides us, and leads us to a place of security and blessing. It's such a vivid picture of hope and restoration. I read it slowly and carefully, and I just imagined all of us in this space, leaning in to hear, taking it to heart. Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for He is good, for His mercies endure forever. Let the redeemed of the Lord say so, whom He has redeemed from the hand of the enemy and gathered out of the lands. And it goes on to describe people wandering, struggling, crying out in trouble, and God delivering them, satisfying their longing souls, filling the hungry with goodness. Isn't that just beautiful? It's a reminder that no matter where we are, whether in a literal wilderness or an emotional one, God is there. His mercy and goodness are steadfast, and His works are wonderful for the children of men. After reading the psalm, I just felt this swell of gratitude and reverence, and I prayed aloud with everyone. I thanked God for His mercy that endures forever, for His compassion, for being our comfort in difficult times. I prayed for the ways He sustains us even when we don't see it, when we feel broken, when we face the struggles of life. And I invited everyone to join in that sense of thanksgiving, not just for the easy, joyful moments, but for the challenges too, because even in those, we see God's faithfulness. The prayer was simple, heartfelt, and a little messy, just like real conversation with God should be. I spoke about the blessings we sometimes overlook: the gift of family, friends, and community, the moments of safety and provision, and even the trials that teach us to lean on God more fully. I acknowledge that we all come to this moment with our own stories, some heavy, some joyful, some a mix of both, and that tonight we would hear just a few of those incredible journeys of faith. And there was this sense of anticipation in the room, knowing that we were about to hear testimonies of hope, perseverance, and transformation, that each story would bring its own lessons and encouragement. The natural flow of this part of the evening felt almost like sitting around a table with friends, sharing what we're grateful for, leaning into that warmth and sense of community. It wasn't about perfection or formality. It was about being real with God and with one another, taking a deep breath and saying, "Thank you." And I think that's exactly what we want to carry through the rest of the night, that sense of open-hearted gratitude, the awareness that every blessing, big or small, comes from God, and that our stories, every single one, matters. So, as we transition from the reading and the prayer into the testimonies, the room felt alive with expectation. People were leaning in, smiling, nodding, maybe even getting a little emotional, because we all know that God works in our lives in ways that are sometimes obvious and sometimes mysterious. And that's what tonight is really about, celebrating that presence, that faithfulness, and preparing our hearts to hear from these incredible individuals and families who will share how God has moved in their lives. It sets the perfect stage for the stories to come, and it reminds us all why Thanksgiving isn't just a date on the calendar, it's a posture of the heart, a way of seeing God at work in everything around us, and an opportunity to rejoice together. Alright, so let me tell you about MJ Mai and his family, because their story is just, wow, it's the kind of journey that really sticks with you. So, MJ and his wife, Suda, they've got 2 daughters, Cheryl and Sonia, and just to give you a full picture, Cheryl is married to Ranju Dominic and they have 3 children, and Sonia is married to Joseph Faye. And then, of course, there's a whole network of extended family and friends, and the way MJ talks about them, you can tell family is central to everything he does. They've also got a big circle of friends from the Indian community in the DC area, and MJ leads something called Indian Friends for Christ. So their lives are really intertwined with ministry, family, and community. Professionally, MJ is impressive. He's a metallurgical engineer and an aeronautical engineer, and he and his family run a business that supports about 20 federal agencies across 33 states, including high-security facilities like nuclear sites and branches of the military like the Space Force and Air Force. So, on paper, life looks like it's moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour, and in many ways, things were going well. They were buying homes, building a life close to their church community, and trying to balance ministry, family, and work. But, of course, life doesn't always stick to the plan we think we have. One of the first big moments they shared was a family trip to Israel with their church. MJ talks about it with such excitement, and you can feel the joy and anticipation. There's this one moment, in particular, about his baptism. Originally, it was scheduled for one day, but MJ, joking a little, said, "God, my birthday is the 4th, can we change it?" And, wouldn't you know it, the baptism got moved to coincide with his birthday. It's one of those small, almost humorous touches that feels like God's hand at work, setting up moments that, looking back, are filled with meaning. It was during this trip and through interactions with their pastor, Gary, that MJ started thinking more seriously about ministry and using his professional skills as part of his service to God. He even had an idea to create something called Finished Well, a way to honor God in the professional world. It's clear that for MJ, faith and life are deeply intertwined. Every decision, every milestone, every celebration is an opportunity to acknowledge God's role. But then, life hits you in ways you never expect. MJ's father flew in from India to visit them on July 24th, and almost immediately, there was a health crisis. His dad complained of shortness of breath at the airport, and by the time they got him home, he suffered a heart attack and passed away. The family was devastated, utterly broken, and if that weren't enough, just a few weeks later, MJ himself received the kind of news that no one ever wants to hear. On August 11th, after a routine series of tests, his doctor told him that he had stage 3 renal cell carcinoma, a form of aggressive kidney cancer. Just like that, life that had seemed so full and steady suddenly felt like it was collapsing. MJ describes the initial reaction honestly, it's raw. He talks about feeling completely blindsided. One day, he's running a business, living life at full speed. The next day, he's facing a 6-month prognosis. And yet, even in those moments of fear and disbelief, faith was central. MJ and Suda knelt down together, praying, leaning into God because they knew that this wasn't a journey they could face alone. There were sleepless nights, anxiety, and uncertainty, but through it all, they kept returning to prayer, seeking guidance and comfort from their faith. He recounts calling Johns Hopkins, trusting that God would provide an opening, and wouldn't you know, they found a slot with the director of oncology and neurology immediately. MJ took it as a sign that God was orchestrating every step. All the scans, the MRI, the bone tests, they came back negative for further spread, which was a huge relief, but the surgery still had to happen. And naturally, the timeline was tight. Doctors initially said there wouldn't be a slot for 2 months, but MJ had prayed before calling, and miraculously, they were able to schedule it the following week. He tells this part of the story with a mix of awe and humor, noting the names of the doctors Maria, Gabriel, and Christian, and how he felt like God was showing up in the details, even in their names, orchestrating the whole team around him. The surgery itself was intense, as you can imagine. The tumor had to be removed along with the kidney, and through it all, MJ emphasizes that it wasn't about his strength, his courage, or anything he could do. It was about God showing up, providing the medical team, guiding their hands, and sustaining MJ's faith. He describes those days before surgery praying with his family, leaning into scripture, holding on to the hope that even when life feels fragile, God's presence is unwavering. And then came the incredible news that changed everything 17 days after the surgery. MJ was declared cancer-free, 17 days from being told he had a maximum of 2 years to live, to hearing that he was healed. He talks about that moment with awe, saying that when death felt real, when fear was pressing in, God became his hiding place. Psalm 62 became a literal anchor for him, a verse that he returned to again and again, where he could find strength and refuge. And through all of this, he says repeatedly it wasn't about his healing alone. It was about understanding where he would go after life, about salvation through Jesus Christ, and the hope that gave him the courage to live. Even in the darkest moments, MJ doesn't shy away from sharing the rawness of it, the sleepless nights, the pills, the tears, the physical and emotional exhaustion, but he also emphasizes the joy and gratitude that followed. The family leaned on one another, leaned on their church community, and leaned on their faith, seeing God's hand in everything from the timing of appointments to the guidance of doctors and the comfort of prayers. It's a story full of peaks and valleys, with moments of despair balanced by miraculous signs of God's intervention and care. The way MJ tells it, the story isn't just about surviving cancer, it's about faith in action, about seeing God's faithfulness not just in big dramatic moments, but in the small, the seemingly mundane details of life that, in retrospect, carry profound significance. It's about surrendering control, trusting that even when life seems chaotic or terrifying, there's a divine plan, and that plan is for good. And it's about the community that surrounds you, the church, friends, family who pray, support, and lift you up when you can't carry the weight on your own. Throughout the story, MJ balances vulnerability with hope. He's not afraid to show the fear, the pain, the anxiety, and the grief, but he pairs it with gratitude, awe, and an unwavering sense of faith. The audience can feel the weight of each challenge, the loss of his father, the shock of a terminal diagnosis, the uncertainty of treatment, but also the triumph of healing, the beauty of answered prayers, and the reassurance that God never left him. And what's really striking is how MJ frames the story not as a tale of personal heroism, but as a testament to God's presence. He's very clear this isn't about him being strong or lucky or disciplined enough. It's about recognizing that God orchestrates the details, provides the resources, and sustains us when life feels impossible. From the precise scheduling of medical appointments to the skill and care of his surgical team, MJ sees God in every moment, and he emphasizes the importance of holding on to hope, even when everything seems lost, and how faith can transform fear into trust and despair into gratitude. By the end of his testimony, the audience is left not just inspired by the miraculous healing, but moved by the authenticity of his journey. There's a natural rhythm to his story, with moments of tension, relief, humor, and awe all woven together in a conversational, heartfelt way that makes you feel like you're right there with MJ and his family, experiencing the highs and lows, the prayers and tears, the miraculous intervention, and the overwhelming gratitude. And so, MJ's story isn't just about surviving cancer. It's about the power of faith, the importance of community, the resilience of the human spirit when anchored in God, and the incredible ways that hope can sustain a family through unimaginable trials. It's a story that makes you pause, reflect, and maybe even reassess how you see your own challenges, reminding us all that no matter how dark the path may seem, God is present, working through people, circumstances, and miracles to guide us forward. The My Family's journey is raw, real, and incredibly moving, a testament to the enduring power of faith, love, and community in the face of life's toughest moments. Okay, so now let's dive into the story of Kyle and Allison Morse, because their journey is honestly one of the most powerful and raw testimonies of faith and perseverance I've ever heard. When you hear about the challenges they faced, it's hard not to be completely moved by what they went through and the way they leaned on God and their community throughout the whole process. So, Kyle and Allison were stationed in Virginia, having just moved as part of Kyle's career in the Air Force. Kyle's an electrical engineer and was active duty, and this was a big transition for them, especially since it was their first move together as a married couple. At the time, Allison was only 6 weeks pregnant with their son Jackson. On paper, it might have seemed like an exciting new chapter, a new city, a new home, the anticipation of a baby. But almost immediately, life threw them into a whirlwind that neither of them could have anticipated. Allison developed severe hyperemesis gravidarum, which is a condition that's often described as extreme morning sickness, but in reality is so much worse than that. It's relentless vomiting, dehydration, and physical exhaustion that can be dangerous for both mother and baby. And for Allison, it escalated fast within just a couple of days. She was hospitalized. They were cycling through ER visits 3 times a week during the first trimester. She was vomiting 50 plus times a day, barely able to keep fluids down, and her blood pressure was dropping. Kyle had to juggle caring for Allison, worrying about the baby, and keeping up with his duties in the Air Force. It was overwhelming. It's the kind of situation that tests every ounce of your strength, physically, mentally, and emotionally. To make matters worse, the medical interventions they tried weren't enough. They installed a midline in her arm to give hydration and nutrients, but that failed almost immediately. A second midline had to be put in the next day, and that led to a blood clot in her jugular vein. Suddenly, it wasn't just about morning sickness, it became a life-threatening scenario that needed constant medical attention and monitoring. The doctors even suggested termination because of the severity and risks involved. Allison was just 12 weeks along at this point. Imagine the emotional and spiritual weight of that decision. It was a choice between her life and the life of the child she carried, and they chose life, choosing faith, even when the path ahead looked nearly impossible. But here's where their community steps in the most beautiful way. The Morses hadn't yet connected in person with their new church, Cornerstone, because Allison couldn't leave the house. They started watching services online, and soon a woman named Cindy reached out after hearing about them through mutual friends from Ohio. She brought meals and started to coordinate support, and then other members of the church followed suit. People they had never met, people who hadn't even been in the same building with them, started showing up, helping with meals, offering prayers, and supporting them in ways that Kyle and Allison describe as life-saving. It was this tangible as hands-on manifestation of God's love through a community of believers. Even with that support, the emotional toll was enormous. Kyle talks about the fear he felt, not just for Allison, but for Jackson, their unborn son. There were days when Allison couldn't pray, couldn't open her Bible, and felt abandoned by God. She was angry and frustrated, questioning why, if God promised faithfulness, he seemed absent in those moments. Kyle watched his wife wrestle with these feelings, and he too had moments of despair. They were both facing a reality that none of us can fully imagine unless we've been there, the constant, unrelenting pressure of a medical crisis layered on top of the physical and emotional strain of pregnancy complications. And yet, through all of this, there were moments of quiet grace. Kyle talks about how, even when Allison's faith faltered, God's faithfulness never did. There wasn't a single dramatic moment where everything changed overnight. Rather, it was a gradual, God-given renewal of faith that came while they were in the middle of pain and uncertainty. One morning, Allison woke up with a renewed sense of peace, a strengthening of faith that she knew could only have come from God. Her circumstances hadn't changed yet. Her physical suffering was still real, but something had shifted internally. She felt a profound sense of trust and surrender. A recognition that even when we don't understand the plan, God is present, and His plan is perfect. Over the next several months, their pregnancy continued to be high risk. Allison was under constant care, with an IV for hydration and medication being pumped 24 hours a day. Nurses were coming in multiple times to change lines and monitor her. Kyle and Allison had to adjust their lives entirely to accommodate this medical regimen. The exhaustion was both physical and emotional, and yet they were surrounded by a community that loved them unconditionally. Meals continued to be delivered, prayers were offered, and they felt a consistent presence of God through the care and generosity of others. It wasn't just support, it was a tangible, daily reminder that they weren't alone. Through all of this, Kyle and Allison also had to grapple with the emotional and spiritual reality of their situation. There were moments of anger, of questioning, of despair. Allison admits to feeling frustrated with God, questioning why she had to go through such intense suffering. And yet, in that wrestling, faith was being formed. The couple describes a process of surrendering their fears, their control, and their expectations to God. They recognize that even in suffering, there could be joy, hope, and a greater purpose. It's a level of vulnerability and honesty that's really moving, showing that faith isn't always about instant answers or neat resolutions, but about trust and perseverance even when the path is unclear. Jackson was born healthy, a true miracle considering the challenges of the pregnancy. But the story doesn't end there. In the months following, after consultations, tests, and countless prayers, Kyle and Allison were faced with the reality that they would not be able to have more biological children. It was devastating. They grieved the children they had imagined, the future they had hoped for. But even in that grief, God's hand was at work. They had always felt called toward adoption, and now, with hearts open and surrendered, they embraced that path. They saw it not as a second choice, not as giving up, but as a beautiful way God was calling them to expand their family and serve Him in a different, profound way. Throughout their story, scripture and faith were central. Isaiah 43:19 became a guiding verse for them. Forget the former things, do not dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing, now it springs forth, do not perceive it. They describe this verse as a lifeline, a reminder that God can make streams in the desert, bring life where it seems impossible, and turn hardship into a testimony of His love. Even when the desert felt lonely, harsh, and hopeless, they could see God working, slowly and surely, bringing healing, provision, and hope. The couple's story isn't just about surviving a medical crisis, it's about the intersection of faith, perseverance, community, and trust in God's plan. They highlight the incredible support of their church, Cornerstone, not just in meals or visits, but in spiritual encouragement, in prayer, and in walking alongside them through uncertainty. They describe being lifted up by people they hadn't even met before, and through that support, they were able to experience God's love in a deeply personal way. And the impact of their story extends beyond their immediate family. Kyle and Allison emphasize how Jackson's life itself is a testament to God's faithfulness. Even the doctors were amazed at his health and strength, noting that his survival was extraordinary given the circumstances. Kyle and Allison see this as a direct reflection of God's intervention and care, a reminder that every life is precious and that God's plans are greater than we can imagine. Throughout the entire journey, the Morses' narrative is conversational, heartfelt, and honest. They don't shy away from the despair, the anger, or the fear. They share it openly, and that's what makes their story so relatable and powerful. At the same time, they don't minimize the joy, the victories, or the miraculous moments. It's a full spectrum of human experience, grounded in faith and the reality of God's presence in every moment, whether painful or celebratory. By the end of their testimony, it's clear that Kyle and Allison have grown in their understanding of faith and trust. They've learned that surrender doesn't mean giving up. It means acknowledging that God is in control, even when life is unpredictable. Their journey is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the power of prayer, the significance of community, and the beauty of trusting in God's plan, even when it leads through valleys we never expected to walk. The story of Kyle and Allison Morse is one that leaves you reflecting, moved, and inspired. It's a story about hope born out of suffering, faith strengthened through adversity, and the ways God works through people, circumstances, and the unfolding of his plan to bring life, healing, and love. It's not just a story about pregnancy complications or medical crises, it's a story about trust, endurance, and the unwavering presence of God in every aspect of our lives, guiding, sustaining, and shaping us for a greater purpose. Let's talk about Scott Rainey's story because it's really one that shows the power of faith, perseverance, and community in the midst of serious health challenges. Scott's journey is both humbling and inspiring, and it's the kind of story that makes you reflect on how fragile life can be and how God's faithfulness can show up in the most unexpected ways. It all started a few years ago when Scott began noticing that things just weren't right. His ability to read emails or communicate normally in his home office started slipping. At first, it was small, subtle changes, words that didn't make sense, sentences that got jumbled, but he knew deep down that something was seriously wrong. He told his wife, Kathy, that he needed to take a walk, hoping the break might help, but it didn't. As he walked, his symptoms worsened, and Kathy immediately recognized that this was an emergency. She rushed him to Innova Hospital, and that's when they confirmed he had suffered a hemorrhagic stroke. It was sudden, life-altering, and terrifying. Scott spent 3 days in the ICU and 6 days in the hospital in total, facing the reality that his brain had been significantly affected. The left side of his brain had been damaged, which impacted his speech, reading, and comprehension. Suddenly, the world he'd always navigated with ease felt foreign and challenging. Scott's recovery wasn't straightforward. He had to relearn language and communication skills, navigating new neural pathways to regain abilities that most people take for granted. Every word he read, every sentence he tried to form was a small victory. And through this, Kathy's unwavering support became the backbone of his journey. She was constantly by his side, helping him navigate medical appointments, therapy sessions, and the frustration that naturally comes with such a monumental recovery process. Scott often reflects on how critical her presence was, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. Her faith, encouragement, and steadfast love helped him keep moving forward when he felt at his most vulnerable. The church community at Cornerstone also played a huge role in his recovery. People he had met at church, including pastors and fellow members, lifted him in prayer, visited, and encouraged him in tangible ways. Scott describes the support he received as overwhelming in the best sense, a combination of practical help, emotional comfort, and spiritual reinforcement that reminded him he wasn't facing this journey alone. He even mentions how coworkers and employees prayed for him, reinforcing that faith isn't confined to a church building, it shows up wherever God places his people. There's a particularly striking moment in Scott's story when he recounts returning to church for the first time after his stroke. He was still unable to speak fluently, and his notes, which he was known for meticulously taking, didn't make sense. But the joy of being back in a place where he could worship, surrounded by people who understood and supported him, was incredible. It wasn't about what he could do, it was about the celebration of life, faith, and community. Every interaction, every prayer, every moment of engagement became a small miracle in itself, reflecting God's faithfulness in ways that were deeply personal and tangible. Throughout this period, Scott also had significant medical guidance and intervention. After initial scans and evaluations, he faced the possibility of surgery, depending on how his recovery progressed. But when the time came for follow-up procedures, the doctors told him there was nothing that needed to be done surgically. Scott saw this as a direct sign of God's intervention and a testament to the healing power that was at work in his life. It reinforced his understanding that recovery isn't always about the medical plan or human effort alone. It's about acknowledging the hand of God in the details, from miraculous recoveries to the timing of care and guidance he received. The narrative of Scott's story is filled with moments of reflection and personal insight. He talks about the emotional and spiritual challenges of facing a serious illness, the fear of losing autonomy, and the frustration of not being able to communicate effectively. And yet, within these trials, he found growth, renewed faith, and a deeper understanding of God's presence. He emphasizes that faith is not just about dramatic miracles, it's about recognizing the small, consistent ways God sustains us, provides for us, and intervenes when needed most. It's about holding on to hope when life doesn't make sense, and trusting that God's plan is perfect, even when it's difficult to comprehend. Scott also shares how his experience changed the way he interacts with the world and with his work. He began sharing his faith more openly with coworkers and employees, using his recovery as an opportunity to demonstrate God's love and faithfulness. It wasn't just a personal journey, it became a platform for ministry, teaching, and encouragement. People saw the transformation in him, the resilience, and the gratitude, and it served as a testimony that faith, even in the darkest moments, has tangible power to impact others' lives. An essential part of Scott's story is the incremental nature of healing. It wasn't a sudden, overnight fix. It was a combination of therapy, prayer, support from loved ones, and divine intervention that came together to help him regain his abilities. Each word spoken correctly, each email read without error, each interaction regained was a testament to progress, perseverance, and the layered work of God in his life. He frames these small victories as miracles in their own right, reflecting on how even minor improvements can feel monumental when faced with such daunting challenges. There's also a deep sense of gratitude that permeates Scott's testimony. He's grateful for his wife, Kathy, whose unwavering faith and support were vital. He's grateful for the church community, who prayed, encouraged, and reminded him of God's presence. He's grateful for medical professionals who worked diligently and skillfully to ensure his recovery. And, most importantly, he's grateful for God's guidance throughout the entire ordeal. This gratitude isn't superficial, it's deeply felt, born out of the intensity of his struggles and the profound realization of how much support and divine intervention played a role in his healing. One of the most compelling aspects of Scott's journey is how he frames his experience spiritually. He doesn't just recount medical facts or recovery milestones. He shares the internal spiritual growth that occurred alongside physical healing. He reflects on how God pursued him, even when he was struggling to pursue God in return. He acknowledges failures, fears, and doubts, but also celebrates the steadfastness of God's love and the ways in which that love became visible through people, circumstances, and moments of unexpected blessing. The story also highlights the importance of community in spiritual and physical recovery. From pastors to friends to colleagues, the people around Scott became conduits of God's faithfulness. They prayed, visited, and offered encouragement, showing that faith is lived out in tangible, practical ways. These relationships became a lifeline, reinforcing the idea that healing spiritual, emotional, or physical is rarely a solitary endeavor. It's strengthened, supported, and sustained by the love and prayers of others. As Scott continued his recovery, he also sought to grow his understanding of Scripture and deepen his faith. He attended church orientations, Christianity 101 and 102 classes, and even pursued baptism again, this time as a conscious adult commitment. Through these experiences, he found clarity, renewed hope, and a stronger connection to God. Each step of this process reinforced the lessons learned during his illness, that God's presence is constant, that faith requires patience and trust, and that perseverance through trials often leads to deeper understanding and growth. Ultimately, Scott's testimony is about more than surviving a stroke. It's about transformation. It's about the way faith, community, and God's guidance intersect in our lives to produce healing, understanding, and gratitude. It's a story that resonates because it's so human. It includes fear, frustration, vulnerability, and uncertainty, but also joy, triumph, and awe at God's intervention. Scott's journey reminds us that even in our most challenging moments, God is present, working through people, circumstances, and miracles to guide us forward. By the time he finishes sharing his story, the audience can feel the depth of his journey, the fear, the struggle, the small victories, the overwhelming moments of gratitude, and the profound spiritual growth. It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit when anchored in faith and the unwavering presence of God in our lives. Scott's experience underscores that miracles aren't always about grand, cinematic events. They're about the cumulative work of God in our everyday lives, seen in recovery, in support, and in the renewal of hope. Through his story, Scott offers encouragement to anyone facing trials, medical, emotional, or spiritual. He emphasizes the importance of leaning on God, trusting his plan, and embracing the support of a community of faith. His journey is both a warning and an inspiration that life can change in an instant, that faith will be tested, but that God's presence, love, and miraculous intervention are real and powerful. Scott Rainey's testimony is ultimately a story of hope, resilience, and divine faithfulness, showing that even in the darkest valleys, God's light guides, sustains, and restores. Alright, let me share Bill Flanagan's story, because it's one of those heartfelt, slightly messy, but utterly real testimonies that sticks with you. Bill's journey to faith didn't start early, it actually came pretty late in life, after decades of, well, doing his own thing. He jokes about it, calling it the Bill Flanagan way of coming to Christ, not going to church for 20 years, not reading the Bible, not praying, just cruising along, and then bam, life throws him a curveball, and suddenly he's looking for an emergency crash course on how to become a Christian. It's funny when he says it, because you can hear the humility and self-awareness in his voice, but the story behind it is really moving. The catalyst was his wife, Moran, who had been diagnosed with early onset dementia. Watching someone you love deteriorate over the years, seeing the little joys slip away and daily tasks become monumental, it takes a huge emotional and spiritual toll. Bill was honest about how difficult it was. He talks about the stress, the heartbreak, and the helplessness of watching the person you've shared your life with struggle to even recognize the world around them. There's a raw honesty in his storytelling here. He doesn't sugarcoat it. He doesn't try to make it inspirational in a traditional sense. He just lays it out. Life got hard, it got painful, and he didn't know where to turn. Bill describes a pivotal summer when things really came to a head. The challenges with caring for Moran became almost unbearable, and he realized he needed help, he needed guidance, and he needed faith. That's when he reached out to a friend who attended Cornerstone Church, and they came together to explore a spiritual path he'd never seriously considered before. It wasn't a quick, slick conversion story, it was messy, it was gradual, and it involved learning and relearning things about God, prayer, and scripture that he hadn't paid attention to in decades. He talks about the first moments of praying, guided by a friend when he really didn't know how to pray. He'd never done it before in any serious way. And there's this wonderful humor in his admission. He says he had to be shown how, and the first prayers were probably awkward, maybe even clumsy, but it was the act of reaching out, of opening his heart, that mattered. And almost immediately then he began noticing shifts, not in the dramatic sense of everything magically being perfect, but in small, meaningful ways. He started feeling peace in moments where chaos once reigned, and he began to notice God's presence in his everyday life. One particularly moving part of Bill's story is how he learned to care for Moran despite her dementia. The medical and emotional challenges were immense. She experienced moments of terror and confusion, and traditional reasoning or talking didn't always help. Instead, Bill learned to respond with presence and touch, holding her hand, massaging her shoulders, giving her little gestures of love and reassurance. He talks about this with such tenderness, explaining how these simple acts could calm her fear and ease her anxiety. It's a beautiful, almost sacred depiction of the ways love and faith intertwine in caregiving, where prayer and practical care go hand in hand. During this time, Bill also leaned heavily on the church community. He recounts how pastors and fellow members came alongside him, offering support, guidance, and prayer. He vividly remembers a visit from Pastor Mike Emerson, who came to Moran and shared the gospel with her in a way that reached her despite the limitations caused by her dementia. Incredibly, Moran responded, pointing to her heart and affirming her desire for salvation, just days before she passed. Bill emphasizes that he believes this was a monumental moment, not just for her, but for him as well. He saw God's faithfulness, grace, and timing in a profoundly personal way. Bill's own baptism followed, and he shares it with characteristic humor and humility, pointing out that he had to learn the basics of faith quickly and that it was all a bit of a scramble. But there's a real depth behind the humor. The baptism symbolized a turning point, a full embrace of faith after a lifetime of learning the hard way. It's a reminder that it's never too late to turn toward God, and that faith can be discovered at any stage of life, in the middle of trials, and even after decades of being absent from the church or scripture. What's powerful about Bill's testimony is the way he interweaves struggle and gratitude. He's honest about the emotional toll of caring for Moran and the grief he felt, but he also consistently highlights God's intervention, the support from the church, and the moments of peace and clarity that kept him moving forward. He talks about the prayers that carried him, the encouragement that came from the community, and the spiritual insights that gradually shaped his understanding of God's love. Even when the narrative is heartbreaking, there's a thread of hope and a recognition of God's sustaining presence. Bill also reflects on the lessons learned through this period. He talks about patience, surrender, and the importance of relying on God not just in the moments of crisis, but in the everyday acts of love and care. He emphasizes that faith isn't just about big miracles, it's about the day-to-day perseverance, the small acts of obedience, the continued turning toward God even when life doesn't make sense. And through it all, he maintains a tone that's conversational, approachable, and deeply relatable. You can picture him telling this story over coffee with friends, laughing a little at himself, wiping away a tear, and reminding everyone that God shows up in the most unexpected ways. Towards the end of his story, Bill expresses immense gratitude not just for his newfound faith, but for the entire community that surrounded him during this intense season of life. He's thankful for the pastors, for the volunteers, for the practical and spiritual support that enabled him to care for Moran and navigate the challenges of her illness. He's grateful for the lessons learned, for the peace that prayer brought, and for the reassurance that God is present, even in the most difficult and heartbreaking moments. Bill Flanagan's testimony closes with a reflection on the fullness of God's grace and the unexpected ways that faith can transform a life. He emphasizes that it's never too late to come to God, that challenges can become avenues for spiritual growth, and that even in the midst of loss, pain, and confusion, there is hope, salvation, and a community to walk alongside you. It's a story that's as much about learning, growing, and trusting as it is about enduring and surviving, and it leaves the audience both moved and inspired. Ultimately, Bill's journey is a powerful reminder that faith is often discovered in the midst of struggle, that God's timing is perfect, and that the support of a loving community can make all the difference. His mix of humor, humility, and honesty makes the story approachable and deeply human, while the underlying message of hope, salvation, and gratitude gives it profound spiritual weight. Through dementia, grief, and a late turn to faith, Bill Flanagan found peace, strength, and the enduring presence of God in a way that continues to inspire and encourage everyone who hears his story. Now, let's talk about Mohand Arab and his family, a story that really puts into perspective the freedoms we often take for granted and the incredible resilience of faith under persecution. Mohand and his family lived in Algeria, a country where being a Christian could put your life, your liberty, and your very safety at risk. Mohand felt a calling to serve as a pastor, to lead worship, and to shepherd a growing evangelical church. But this was in a nation where public Christian practice was met with intense scrutiny and hostility. The challenges they faced were daunting and constant. For Mohand, living out his faith was never optional, it was who he was. But practicing that faith came at great personal risk. In Algeria, his church was one of many that faced daily harassment. Buildings could be raided, gatherings disrupted, and pastors and church leaders imprisoned on unjust charges. Mohand and his congregation lived with the reality that each day could bring danger, fines, or even jail. And sadly, that day came. His church, along with 40 others, was forcibly shut down by the authorities. It wasn't just about closing a building, it was about silencing a community, about sending a message that practicing faith openly would have consequences. Mohand himself faced imprisonment and was fined 10 million Algerian dinar, about $500, a staggering sum in their context. He endured this, knowing that the cost of following Christ in Algeria was not only financial, but deeply personal and profoundly risky. Yet, Even amid these challenges, Mohan's story is one of hope, perseverance, and unwavering faith. He speaks about God's guidance throughout these trials. Despite the fear, the uncertainty, and the threats, he continued to lead his family and congregation in faith, trusting that God's presence was stronger than any earthly opposition. And then, a remarkable thing happened. God provided a way for Mohan and his family to leave Algeria before the court case could be finalized. This was not through conventional means, but through divine orchestration and the intervention of family. Mohan's sister in the United States received a dream in which she was told that Mohan was being persecuted and that she needed to help him come to America. Acting on this guidance, she facilitated the family's escape, ensuring that they could find safety and the freedom to worship openly in a new country. Arriving in the United States as refugees, the Arab family faced the challenge of starting over in a completely new environment. They were far from home, their lives uprooted, yet they carried with them an incredible sense of faith and resilience. The transition wasn't simple learning a new language, adapting to a new culture, and finding their place in a community from scratch, but the family's faith gave them strength. They leaned on one another, trusting that God had brought them to this point for a reason, and that their journey was far from over. It was at this critical moment that the support of the church community in the U.S., and specifically Cornerstone, became a lifeline. Members of the church helped the family navigate practical needs, provided financial and emotional support, and offered a welcoming spiritual home. Mohan speaks with deep gratitude about how the church not only welcomed them, but actively invested in their well-being, helping them find stability and a sense of belonging in a foreign land. The support ranged from English language lessons to guidance on adapting to life in a new country, to simply being present as a loving, caring community. For a family who had experienced persecution, imprisonment, and the forced closure of their church, this support was more than helpful. It was life-affirming and faith-strengthening. Mohan's story highlights the stark contrast between the oppression they faced in Algeria and the freedom they found in the United States. Here, they could worship openly, gather with other believers, and participate in church life without fear of retribution. The freedom to practice their faith became a source of immense gratitude, and Mohan often reflects on the significance of this liberty not just as a personal blessing, but as a reminder of how precious religious freedom truly is. It's a freedom many of us take for granted, but for Mohan and his family, it was life-changing. Despite the hardship and trauma, the Arab family's faith never wavered. Mohan emphasizes the importance of trusting God even when the path is uncertain. From the threats and fines in Algeria to navigating refugee life in the US, he consistently points back to God's guidance and protection. He speaks about perseverance, highlighting how faith sustained them through fear, displacement, and the challenges of building a new life from scratch. His story is not just about suffering, it's about resilience, hope, and the unwavering presence of God in every step of their journey. One particularly moving aspect of their story is how they have continued to serve and worship even after resettling. The family remains actively engaged in ministry and church life, sharing their experiences and their faith with others. They contribute to worship, participate in church activities, and help support others in the community, becoming a living testament to God's faithfulness. Mohan and his family are clear that their journey was not just about survival, it was about continuing to live their calling, to lead by example, and to show others that even in the face of extreme adversity, God provides, protects, and sustains. The narrative of Mohan Arab and his family also highlights the interplay between personal faith and community support. While their trust in God provided inner strength and courage, the tangible support from the Cornerstone community helped them adapt to a completely new life. From helping with daily practicalities to providing spiritual guidance and fellowship, the church played a crucial role in their successful resettlement. This combination of faith, perseverance, and community support illustrates a powerful lesson. Resilience is strengthened not just by individual determination, but by the love, prayers, and support of a caring community. As Mohan shares his story, there's a clear sense of awe and gratitude. He reflects on the miracles along the way, the guidance of his sister through a dream, the timely escape to the United States, and the continued support from a welcoming church. These moments are framed not as coincidences, but as evidence of God's hand at work, orchestrating events and providing for the family in ways that surpass their understanding. His testimony is filled with this sense of wonder, emphasizing that even in the darkest moments, God's plan and provision are steadfast. Ultimately, the story of Mohand Arab and his family is one of hope, courage, and unshakable faith. It's a reminder of the costs that some believers face simply for practicing their faith, and of the precious gift of religious freedom that allows others to worship openly. Their journey from persecution in Algeria to safety, community, and spiritual growth in the United States underscores the power of perseverance, the importance of trusting God's guidance, and the transformative role of a supportive faith community. Throughout their story, Mohand emphasizes the centrality of faith, prayer, and trust in God. Despite the threats, fines, and imprisonment, he never lost sight of God's presence and protection. His family's resilience, coupled with the support from their new church community, allowed them to rebuild their lives and continue serving in ministry. Their narrative is not just about surviving persecution, it's about thriving in faith, embracing new opportunities, and living as a testament to God's faithfulness. By the end of Mohand's testimony, the audience is left with a profound sense of admiration and inspiration. They see the courage it takes to maintain faith under persecution, the relief and joy of finding freedom and safety, and the importance of a supportive community that helps believers continue their spiritual journey. His story is a vivid reminder that, even in the face of injustice, God's presence, guidance, and provision can bring hope, healing, and a renewed sense of purpose. In the larger picture, Mohand Arab and his family's journey illustrates the universal themes of faith, perseverance, hope, and gratitude. It's a story of courage in the face of danger, reliance on God in moments of uncertainty, and the transformative power of community support. Their experiences, both in Algeria and in the United States, highlight the ways that faith can sustain, inspire, and guide individuals and families through life's most challenging moments. And for those listening, it's a powerful reminder that even when circumstances seem overwhelming, God's faithfulness remains, providing a path forward, protection, and hope for the future. Before we wrap up tonight, I want to share some of the wonderful messages of gratitude that came in from our online community. It's amazing to see how far-reaching the impact of faith and fellowship can be. People from all over Charlotte, Boise, Bunn, and so many other places sent in notes of thanks. Some are grateful for the church services that help them feel connected to God even from miles away. Others express deep appreciation for the support networks, the small groups, the K groups, and the women's Bible studies that provide encouragement, friendship, and accountability. Families shared gratitude for the way the church supports their children, from educational programs like Cornerstone Christian Academy to the spiritual guidance offered to young adults. Many mentioned personal milestones too, like welcoming a grandchild, recovering from major health challenges, or seeing relationships restored, and they tied all of these blessings back to God's faithfulness and the love of the community. It's really moving to read these messages because they reflect the ways God works through people and community to meet hearts and needs in real life. The gratitude is tangible. It's about being seen, being supported, and being reminded that none of us are alone in our journeys. Whether it's a simple message of thanks for being able to watch online, or a heartfelt story of God's provision in a difficult circumstance, it all points to the power of faith shared and lived together. As we close tonight, let's carry that sense of gratitude and encouragement with us. We've heard stories of incredible perseverance, miraculous healing, and steadfast faith. We've seen how God's hand moves through everyday people, ordinary moments, and extraordinary challenges. And we're reminded of the precious gift of freedom, the ability to worship openly, to pray without fear, and to gather as a community. That freedom is not just a privilege, it's an invitation to live fully in faith, to share hope, and to be a light in the world. So as we stand together for our final prayer, let's lift up every story, every message of thanks, and every person represented tonight. Let's thank God for the sustaining grace that carries us through trials, for the blessings we often take for granted, and for the communities that make the journey richer and stronger. Let's pray for continued faith, continued courage, and continued opportunities to show love, support, and gratitude in our own lives. May the hope, peace, and joy we've experienced tonight continue to inspire and guide us every day, reminding us that God is faithful, generous, and always present in our lives. Thanks so much for sticking with us tonight. I hope these stories of faith, perseverance, and gratitude have lifted your spirits and reminded you of the power of community and God's faithfulness. If you felt encouraged, consider showing a little love by liking or subscribing so more people can hear these testimonies. Take a moment to reflect, carry that sense of hope with you, and remember that even in challenges, there's always reason for gratitude. Wishing you a peaceful and joyful week ahead.